participating in any of these negotiations at all, they very much have the upper hand in the skies over Iran. Alex.
Okay. Thank you, Matt, for the very latest. We appreciate that from Tel Aviv. Let's go now to Denver Wigelman. He's joining me, and former, of course, Air Force intelligence officer, former congressman, former senior advisor to the January 6th Select Committee. There's a lot going on with you, my friend. So here's the first question to you. Number one, President Trump, he has given himself, 2 weeks now to decide whether he's going to deploy U.S. troops to drop a 30,000-pound bomb on Iran. But he appears to have sidelined Tulsi Gabbard and Pete Hegseth. Whose intel is he relying on to make his decision?
Well, my guess is, I was just reading something. I hope it's not John Ratcliffe, right? And, I also hope, right, that he's not relying on Steve Bannon, the MAGA movement, and Putin, right, who warned him not to do it. But I think most of that's coming probably from a combination of people ignoring Tulsi Gabbard and Pete Hegseth and going straight to John Radcliffe, maybe to the Joint Chiefs. My guess is he's probably looking at that. And the issue that you have, if you're not listening to your institutional heads, I wonder about the incompetence that you have at the top. And I've warned about that for a long time. If you have people that base policy on fantasy, you're going to have a tough time making decisions in the reality of the moment. And I think that's what you're seeing right now with the Trump administration is mass confusion, but also him trying to appease sort of the MAGA base at the same time while trying to make serious decisions on what's going on with Iran and Israel, but also how that actually cascades to Russia and Ukraine, which we can, talk about, Alex. All this is in play. But I think what I get out of this is that you have an incompetent head of the intelligence communities, and he's listening to other people that sort of go down his line on what his opinion is based on where he is on Israel and also on Russia and also on Iran.
Let me just get into something. I was just given this, and this is what we're able to report this moment on the U.S.-Iran engagement. The U.S. and Iran continue this weekend, Denver, to communicate, though it's unclear the extent to which these could be considered negotiations. We have Iran's foreign minister who exclusively told Andrea Mitchell yesterday that they are not negotiations. Likewise, a U.S. official this afternoon affirmed that engagement with the Iranians is still ongoing today, but the administration is not providing any further detail about the communications or anything about its approach toward Iran in the coming days. I'm curious your reaction, just big picture, to what you think is happening right now.
Oh, I know what's happening. There's complete confusion on what they're going to do next, right? He's getting a lot of pressure from Israel to come in right now, right? Israel started this conflict. And here's the thing, Alex, there's two things that I like about this as far as when you're talking about irony and insanity. Number one, when it came out that they bombed Iran, we had nothing to do with it. Then we come out later saying, oh, yeah, we were part of it. So here's the issue. Are we saying that Israel is dragging us into a war that they didn't ask us about or get intelligence on when they started bombing Iran? Are we saying that we lied as a U.S. government initially because we didn't want the truth to come out about our intelligence support? Both of those are equally awful. And I think when you're seeing the confusion right now, you have an administration that not only knows what's happening internally, as we just talked about with Tulsi Gabbard and Hegseth and who to listen to, but are they briefing Congress? So here's another big issue with the confusion at the executive level. What does Congress know? Shouldn't Congress be heavily involved, right, in any execution of funds, right, or any deployment of troops or weapons or ordnance into Iran? So I think it's massive confusion. There's been insanity in the first 4 to 5 months of this administration anyway. I don't think we can expect any different as we're trying to maneuver competently through foreign issues like we're seeing today.
So, again, trying to get to where the truth of everything is, Denver, I'm curious what the chances are that U.S. intelligence agency reports on Iran are inaccurate or flat out wrong, as the president told my colleague NBC's Von Hilliard yesterday.
Well, Iran's not easy to penetrate, right? And you're going to have courses of action. So as an intelligence officer, and I'm very familiar with Iran, and I want people to know my history with Iran is extensive, especially in the counter-IED space. In the mid-2000s, when Iran was doing resupply to Iraq for IEDs, killed a lot of American GIs. So it's definitely personal for me, too, when I'm talking about these issues. But I think what we have to look at, right, as we're going down the line with Iran, right, is what does, instability look like in the region? What does the refugee status look like? I can go through the pros and cons of Iran all day. I just believe right now we don't have an administration that can make a decision based on the best interests of the U.S. because they're too busy trying to appease foreign powers or political interests, regardless of what happens to us long term. And Alex, I think that's what worries me. And, I know if we had another hour, I could go through the pros and cons of Iran. If you want me to try to do it in 5 minutes of taking them out and how it deals with Russia, I can. But I think the worry for Americans and for Congress is that we have an administration that seems completely confused about what Iran even is, what their military can do, or what would happen with a destabilization if we were to go into Iran. And listen, there are pros to hitting Iran. I'm going to tell people right now there are, especially with destabilizing, or stopping Russia's advance into Ukraine and the drone, technology that's going to Russia, the Shaheds that are going to Ukraine. There's all kinds of things we can talk about, Alex. But my God, can we please get some clarity on what the administration wants to do and whether we're just following Israel's lead or we're following the lead of the American citizens and what's best for our country?
So I want to augment something that you previously said, and you're backed up here by the New York Times, which says Trump changed his mind about disclosing U.S. involvement only after the Israeli strikes in Iran appeared to be successful. They say when Trump woke up to his favorite TV channel broadcasting imagery of what it was portraying as Israel's military genius, Trump could not resist claiming credit for himself. What do you find most troubling about that, Denver?
I find it troubling that somebody whose own ego or to follow the whims of what he thinks is a win is more important than solid foreign policy decisions. It also is this childish behavior. And I don't think you want childish behavior or somebody who goes by newspaper or TV reports making decisions for the American public. And I think that's incredibly dangerous. And I've said from the beginning, when you elect clowns, or you have clowns in positions of leadership or people that are there just for loyalty, that means you don't have serious decision makers, and unseriousness equals danger. And I think what you're looking at is an unserious way of doing business, and that's what should bother every intelligence and, I would say, political professional.
I'm grateful for you, my friend. Despite the sobering nature of this conversation, you'll be back again soon. Denver, thanks.
Thank you, Alex.
New questions about what happened to President Trump's promise to